The courtroom was small and stuffy, water stains yellowing the ceiling from some old leak nobody had ever fixed. Megan Bennett sat at the defendant's table in a gray suit that cost more than every stick of furniture in the apartment where she'd grown up. She was 45. Her hands rested in her lap, calm, too calm for a woman accused of fraud. "Megan Bennett," the judge said, "you've been named in a civil complaint filed by Linda Bennett and Haley Bennett. The plaintiffs allege that a deed transferring property to you 26 years ago is fraudulent, and that the late Margaret Bennett lacked the capacity to understand what she was signing." Megan looked up. 10 feet away, at the plaintiff's table, sat her mother. Linda had aged, gray strands escaping a careful updo, hands trembling around her purse. Beside her sat Megan's younger sister, Haley, 41, with the dry, tired face of someone who'd been angry at someone for far too long. Her mother stared at the table, worrying the edge of her sleeve between her fingers, an old habit from childhood, the thing she did when she was afraid to say something out loud. "Mom," Megan said quietly, "do you really think I cheated Grandma?" Linda flinched but didn't lift her head. The plaintiff's attorney, a thin man with a folder of documents, leaned over and whispered something to her. She gave a short nod without meeting anyone's eyes. "Your Honor," the attorney began, rising, "we contend that the late Margaret Bennett was elderly and vulnerable at the time this will was executed, and may have been misled about the defendant's true intentions." "Objection," Megan's attorney said at once. "The plaintiffs haven't produced a single medical record establishing incapacity. This entire case rests on speculation." The judge raised a hand for quiet. "Both sides will have the opportunity to make their case as we proceed." "All rise," the clerk said. Megan stood. The words stuck in her throat. She was used to that by now. She'd learned a long time ago not to ask twice when the answer was silence. This ends today, she thought, one way or another. But to understand how two women bound by blood ended up on opposite sides of a courtroom, you have to go back 38 years to a small apartment on the edge of a small town in Ohio, where the story began of a girl her own family talked to stay quiet. Megan was 7 when her father died. A heart attack, sudden, at work. She remembered only one thing, her mother crying in the kitchen, pressing a hand over her own mouth so she wouldn't wake little Haley. "It's just us now," Linda had said, holding her older daughter close. "You have to be my helper, Meg." Megan nodded. She wanted to say, "I'm scared too, Mom." She didn't. She was 7, and she already understood that talking about her own fear had no place here. That was the beginning of her first silence, small, childish, almost invisible. 3 years later, Richard came into their lives. He was polite, fit, with the confident hands of a man who could fix anything. In his first month, he repaired a leaking faucet, hung a new light fixture in the girls' room, and took both of them to the amusement park, Haley on the Ferris wheel, Megan on the roller coaster, because the older one gets the ride that takes some nerve. "Good for you, not being scared of heights," he told Megan that day, ruffling her hair. "Not like some people." 10-year-old Megan straightened her spine and held her head a little higher the whole ride home. She liked Richard. Linda, watching them, smiled for the first time in a long while. A real smile, not a forced one. It was a Sunday, home repairs. Megan was 10 and a half. Richard was on his back under the sink, wrenching loose a rusted trap, and Megan crouched beside him, handing him tools. He'd asked for her, not Haley, and that made her glow a little. "Hold it like this, the 19mm. He directed, not looking up from the pipe. You catch on faster than I expected for a kid your age. I like it when things get fixed, Megan admitted. You know what's broken. You know how to make it right. Now that's the right way to look at life, Richard said, grinning as he slid out from under the sink with wet hands. Not like some people who just whine and never lift a finger. He didn't say who he meant. Megan didn't think twice about it then. She only felt a warm little glow of pride at being praised. Megan was 11. At dinner one night, Richard laughed and pulled a box of chocolates out of his bag, handing it straight to Haley. "What about me?" Megan asked, before she could stop herself, and the question came out sounding like a demand. "Megan's a big girl now," he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "She doesn't need sweets. Ruins the figure." Everyone laughed, even her mother. Megan smiled too, because not smiling would have made it look like she was hurt over something small. She said nothing. Something inside her creaked quietly, like a floorboard stepped on too carefully to make a sound. Later, getting ready for bed, she pulled a notebook out from under her pillow and wrote at the bottom of the page, not even sure why, "I don't need sweets." She looked at the words, tore out the page, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. She was 11, and she was already learning to hide from herself the things that were unpleasant to notice. Megan was 13. In the courtyard, a neighbor kid shoved Haley off the swings and called her a nasty name. Megan wanted to step in herself, but didn't get the chance. Richard came flying out the window in his house slippers and tore into the boy so thoroughly he didn't show his face in the yard for a week. "Nobody messes with my girls," he said, pulling both of them in against his shoulders. And Megan, despite everything, felt a rush of gratitude. "Maybe I'm just too hard on him," she thought. That thought would linger in her for a long time. Because that's exactly how doubt works, keeping you from calling things what they are when it still matters. Megan was 12 when Richard officially moved in. From that day on, an unspoken list of chores took shape in the apartment. Nobody ever said it out loud, but everyone knew it by heart. "Megan, do the dishes. Megan, run to the store. Megan, why'd you get a B again? You don't help Haley with her homework at all. You just go out and have fun." Haley was 7 then. Megan was 14. "I'm not her babysitter," Megan told her mother one day in the kitchen, quietly, so Richard wouldn't hear. Linda looked at her with tired eyes. "Meg, please. You're the oldest. You need to understand." "Why do I always have to understand?" "Why doesn't anyone have to understand me?" Her mother said nothing, and Megan, instead of pushing further, went quiet too, pressed her lips shut and turned to the sink. It was easier than waiting for an answer that wasn't coming. Richard stood by the fridge, arms crossed. "Who took the money out of the desk drawer?" Megan looked up from her textbook. "I didn't take anything." "There was $300 in there this morning. Gone now. Haley says you were in the room yesterday." "I was getting my chemistry book. Richard, I did not touch your money." "Don't you raise your voice at me in this house," he said, quiet and full of threat. "Linda, you hear how she's talking to me?" Her mother came into the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes moved from Richard to her daughter and back, and Megan saw that half-second of hesitation, the exact moment her mother could still have chosen differently. "Mom," Megan said, "you believe me, right? Tell him I didn't take it."
Linda opened her mouth, closed it.
Richard stared her down, arms crossed, as if waiting for her to pass a test she was required to pass. Megan apologized to Richard. "For what? I didn't do anything." "Apologize," her mother repeated, harder this time, and in her voice Megan heard, for the first time, not concern, but fear. The fear of losing the man who supported the family. Megan opened her mouth to argue, and shut it again. Tears choked her throat, but she didn't cry. She simply stopped talking. Not because she agreed, because she understood. Words meant nothing here. "Fine," she said finally. "Sorry." Hey everyone, quick break from the story. If this one's already found its way into your heart, drop a like and hit subscribe. That's not just a number to me. It tells me stories like this still matter to people, that they're still finding the listeners who need them. I'd love to get to know you a little better too. Tell me your age in the comments.
Every number hides a whole life, its own memories, its own victories, its own battles.
Thank you for being here. Now, back to the story. The money turned up a week later. Richard had simply moved it to another jacket pocket himself. Nobody apologized to Megan. She hadn't expected anyone to. Linda lay awake beside Richard's snoring form. In the dark, she kept seeing Megan's face after that sorry, blank, without a single flicker of feeling. She didn't do anything. I know she didn't do anything. She propped herself up on an elbow and looked at the phone on the nightstand. She wanted to get up, go into her daughter's room, say something, anything. Then the bed creaked under Richard, and Linda lay back down, pulling the blanket up to her chin, as if that could protect her. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow I'll talk to her. Tomorrow never came. Neither did the many tomorrows after it. There was one woman in Megan's life who never once made her feel like a burden. Her grandmother, Grandma Margaret, her father's mother. Every summer, Megan went to stay with her in a small house on the edge of town, wood frame with a sagging porch and apple trees in the yard. "You're just like your father," her grandmother would say, smoothing her hair. "Just as stubborn, just as kind. Hold on to that." At her grandmother's, Megan felt for the first time not like a burden, but like someone loved. She didn't have to stay quiet there. She could say anything, and someone would actually listen. "Grandma, why doesn't Mom stand up for me?" she asked once when she was 16. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, pouring the tea. "Your mother's afraid of being left alone, Meg. She's weak, not in character, in will. A weak will is when a person knows the truth, but chooses silence because silence is easier." She looked her granddaughter in the eye. "You're not like that."
Sometimes the strong ones have to carry the weight for the weak. It isn't fair, but that's how it is.
Megan didn't fully understand those words then. She wouldn't understand them for years, and wouldn't notice right away the bitter irony in them. The silence she'd been taught at home was nothing like her mother's silence. One was a shield, the other was surrender. Once, helping her grandmother hang laundry, 17-year-old Megan suddenly asked, "Grandma, don't you ever wish I'd just tell you everything the way it really is? About Richard, about how things are at home?" Margaret smoothed a sheet on the line without turning around. "Do you want to tell me?" Megan thought about it. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like if I say it out loud, it'll only get worse. That nobody will believe me. Or they'll believe me and nothing will change anyway." "Then don't," her grandmother said calmly. "But remember the difference, sweetheart.
There's a silence that protects you until you're ready. And there's a silence that eats you alive slowly because you're afraid no one will hear you. The first one you're allowed to keep. The second one will ruin you." Megan hung one more pillowcase on the line and stayed quiet a long while, turning the words over. She had no idea she'd remember them nearly 3 decades later, in a courtroom, a second before she finally decided to speak. Megan was 17. She came home earlier than usual and, before she'd even reached her room, heard voices in the kitchen. "Linda, hand over your paycheck. I'll put it in the account," Richard was saying, flat and even, the way people talk about the weather. "I need some for groceries, for Haley's classes." "I said hand it over. I'll decide what we need and what we don't. You can't even do math. How many times do I have to explain that?" Megan froze in the hallway. She heard her mother's sigh and hand over the envelope. Then Richard picked her phone up off the table and scrolled through her messages. "Who's Jessica? Texting with that gossip again? Spend less time with these women. They just fill your head with nonsense." Megan stood there, unable to move. She was old enough now to understand. This wasn't care. This was a cage, just without the bars. But she never walked into that kitchen. She turned around slowly, quietly shut the apartment door behind her, and left. Because for the first time she understood something. Sometimes it isn't that there's nothing to say. It's that no one is going to hear you anyway. Megan was 18, Haley 13. One evening at the table, looking at her sister's new haircut, Haley curled her lip in a way that was pure Richard. "That doesn't suit you. You really don't take care of yourself. No wonder you still don't have a boyfriend." Megan froze with her fork in the air. Those weren't Haley's words. They were Richard's, delivered in his exact tone, as if Haley had been rehearsing the role for years without ever noticing. "Haley, you sound exactly like him right now," Megan said quietly. "Like who?" "Like Richard." Haley flushed and turned away. "That's not true. I'm just being honest." Megan looked at her little sister, a 13-year-old already learning to carry someone else's cruelty as the only language of power available in a house where power decided everything. She felt sorry for her, but she kept that feeling to herself too. Later, alone in her room, Haley sat in front of the mirror, studying her own reflection. She kept picturing how Megan hadn't gotten angry, just flinched, like she'd been struck. She wanted to run after her, apologize. Instead, she turned away from the mirror, as if she couldn't stand to look at herself anymore, and curled up, facing the wall. Megan was 19 when her grandmother died. A stroke, in her sleep, quiet. Megan found out first. Her grandmother's neighbor called her because for the last 2 years Megan had been the only one who showed up regularly, brought the medications, sat up through the bad nights. At the funeral, Megan stood by the casket feeling as though her last support had been ripped away from her. The one place in the world where she never had to prove anything. 2 weeks after the funeral, the phone rang. A lawyer who'd handled her grandmother's estate. "Megan Bennett, your grandmother, Margaret Bennett, left a will. The house and all her savings go to you." Megan said nothing into the phone for so long that the lawyer asked if she was still there. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm here." She hadn't known. Her grandmother had never mentioned a will. But in that moment, reading a document dated 3 years earlier, Megan remembered a conversation on the porch. Sometimes the strong ones have to carry the weight for the weak. Maybe her grandmother had already seen something coming. At home, a fight was waiting for her that she'd never forget. "You planned this," Haley shouted, 16 and red with fury. "You were always her favorite, and now you've grabbed the house, too." "I didn't plan anything," Megan said quietly. "I didn't even know about the will." "Liar!" Richard slammed his fist on the table hard enough to rattle the dishes. "You worked that old woman for years, playing the devoted granddaughter, when really you were just waiting for her to die and leave you everything." "How can you say that?" Megan's voice shook. "I loved my grandmother. I was the only one who ever even went to see her." "Because you knew exactly what you were doing,"
Haley yelled. "And what about me and Mom? We got nothing while you got rich?" Megan looked at her mother. Linda stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, silent. "Mom," Megan said quietly, Tell them it isn't true."
Linda lifted her eyes, and in them Megan saw not support, but something far worse. Doubt.
"Meg," her mother whispered, Maybe you should sign the house over to all of you. Fair and equal." Something inside Megan gave way. She opened her mouth to explain again, to argue her case, and in that same instant, understood it was pointless. She went quiet. "So you don't want to share," Richard snapped, reading her silence as confirmation. "So everything I thought about you was right. Ungrateful. Selfish. Pack your things. There's no place for you in my house anymore." "Richard," her mother tried weakly. "Him or her," he cut her off. Megan looked at her mother for one long, terrible second, waiting for a single word, a single gesture. Linda dropped her eyes. Megan said nothing back. She turned, went to her room, and started packing a bag, quietly, methodically, as if silence were the only thing she had left that was still whole. She left that same night. She was 19.
She had a house left to her by her grandmother, and no family. Her grandmother's house greeted her with darkness and the smell of dust. Nobody had lived there full-time in years. Megan lay down on the old couch without changing and listened for a long time to the unfamiliar sounds of a house that was hers now. Creaking floorboards, wind in the apple trees, a dog barking somewhere far off. She was scared. A child's kind of scared, the kind that has nothing to do with age. She dialed her mother's number. Ringing. Again. Ringing. She hung up herself before anyone could hang up on her. She didn't cry, not even now. Tears sat in a hard knot in her throat, but never fell. Megan had long since forgotten how to cry in front of witnesses, and there were no witnesses left at all. And still, she couldn't make herself do it. Silence had stopped being a habit. It had become the body she lived in now. In the morning, she counted her money, what little was left after the funeral. Enough for a month, maybe 6 weeks. She sat at her grandmother's table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea, and for the first time thought not, how do I make them love me, but how do I survive on my own? It wasn't self-pity, it was a decision. Megan found work within 2 weeks, a front desk job at a furniture store. The pay was small, but enough for a room in an old house divided into rentals with a shared kitchen. She couldn't bring herself to rent out her grandmother's house, not yet. Everything was too fresh, the wound too raw. She called her mother every Sunday. The first 3 months, no answer. On the 4th month, Haley picked up. "Mom doesn't want to talk to you," she said flatly, and hung up before Megan could respond. Megan stood there with the phone in her hand in the middle of the shared kitchen, listening to the dial tone. Peggy, the neighbor, sitting at the table with a newspaper, looked up over her glasses. "Them again?" Megan nodded, unable to get a word out. "Sit down, have some tea," Peggy said simply, without asking anything more, and that was exactly what she needed. In the Bennett kitchen, Richard was counting the money out of the envelope Linda had brought home from work. "That's all of it?" "That's all, Richard. That's all they gave me." "Then we tighten up more." He tucked the money into his jacket. "And another thing. Enough chatting on the phone with that Deborah from the office. I don't like what you two talk about." Linda nodded silently, turning back to the stove. 14-year-old Haley came home from school later than usual. She'd stayed to hang out with friends. Richard met her in the entryway, no smile on his face. "Where were you?"
"With Emma and Chloe. It was her birthday, I told you."
"I don't remember saying yes." He took the phone out of her hand. "Until you learn to ask first, you'll go without a phone."
"Dad, that's not fair."
"Life isn't fair," he cut her off, pocketing the phone. "Get used to it." Linda, standing in the kitchen doorway, said nothing, watching her younger daughter walk off to her room, crying. New Year's came. Unable to bear the silence any longer, Megan drove to the building she'd grown up in, just to stand outside, look up at the lit windows. The door opened before she could leave. Haley stood on the step, 16 now, in a new sweater. "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to say Happy New Year." "Mom doesn't want to see you." Haley was looking past her, into the dark of the courtyard. "Besides, why do you even need us? You've got a house now. Go live there." The door closed. Megan stood alone in the stairwell, listening to the muffled sound of a television and laughter behind the door. Laughter that wasn't hers. She didn't cry there, either. She turned and went down, counting the steps, because counting was easier than thinking. Another year passed. Megan sat on her floor with bills spread out in front of her. Rent, electricity, textbooks. There wasn't enough money for all of it at once. "Maybe they were right," she whispered into the empty room. "Maybe it really is all my fault. Maybe if I were different." She wrapped her arms around her knees and sat like that for a long time, letting herself cry for the first time in 2 years, quietly, without sobbing. She called Peggy, the neighbor, not to complain, just to hear a living voice. "Peggy, can I come by for tea?" "Of course, honey. Come on over. I've got apple pie fresh out of the oven." They sat together at the small kitchen table, and Peggy, without asking for details, just talked about her own younger years, how she'd once left home herself, how scared she'd been, how she'd made it through. "You know the difference between the ones who make it and the ones who don't?" she asked, refilling the tea. "It's not money, and it's not luck.
It's that one day, the ones who make it just stop waiting for someone else to fix their life for them." Megan got home late. She washed her face with cold water and pulled out an ad for a second job she'd picked up that morning at a bus stop. Enough, she thought. Enough waiting for someone to show up and tell me it wasn't my fault. I'll tell myself. She met Adam 6 months later. At work, he delivered furniture for installations. Tall, easy smile, attentive. For the first time in a long while standing next to a man, Megan felt like she wasn't being measured against anyone. "You're not like the other front desk people," he said as they unloaded the last box together. "Usually they boss the movers around from the doorway. You're carrying boxes yourself." "I'm used to doing things myself," Megan shrugged. "Bad habit or good one?" "Depends who you ask." He laughed, and it was an easy laugh, one that didn't ask for anything back. On their first date, he gave her a small cactus. "So it reminds you that you're allowed to be prickly, and that's okay." Megan kept it for years afterward, even after everything. "You've got amazing eyes," he told her on their third date. "You know what I keep noticing? You never talk about your family." "Not much to tell," Megan said shortly. "Everybody's got something to tell." She said nothing, looking away toward the cafe window. Adam didn't push. At the time, it felt like tact. He knew how to listen, how to sit quietly beside her without demanding explanations. And little by little, Megan started letting him into the corners of her life she'd always kept locked. She told him about her grandmother's house, not about her family, but about the relationship, about how the apple trees smelled in spring. He listened closely, asking not about money, but about smells and sounds. And Megan, without quite noticing, began trusting him more than she'd planned to.
8 months in, Megan overheard Adam on the phone in the next room, thinking she was in the shower. "Nah, don't worry about it," he was saying, half laughing. "She's got a house from her grandmother. Decent one, too. Good neighborhood. I'll bring up selling it in a couple months. Easy. She trusts me by now. We've been together a while. We'll figure it out." Megan stood in the hallway, water dripping from her hair onto her shoulders, everything inside her clenching into a cold, hard knot. She didn't scream, didn't break anything. She opened the bedroom door, took his things off the shelf, razor, shirts, charger, and stacked them by the door without a word. "Megan, what's going on?" He came out of the room, still smiling. She looked at him, for the first time in 8 months, straight on, without fear. "Get out," she said, quiet but firm. "And don't even think about coming back." "Come on, I was just—" "Nobody is ever getting from me again what I'm not willing to give," Megan said. And in that moment her own words sounded like a discovery to her. It was the first time she'd said no, out loud, clearly, without fear of what came after. He left, slamming the door. Megan locked it, sank down onto the hallway floor, and for the first time in a long time felt not pain, but something close to strength. Diana Foster, who owned the furniture store, didn't notice Megan right away, but eventually she did. "Why are you back here unloading boxes instead of up front at the register?" she asked one evening, finding Megan among the packing crates. "I was told it's part of the job." "Told by who?" Megan shrugged. "Nobody, just somebody has to." Diana looked at her for a long moment, tapping her pencil against her notepad, a habit that showed up when she was thinking about something more than a casual conversation. "You know what experience has taught me? People who pile other people's work onto themselves usually grew up somewhere they were taught they weren't worth anything otherwise." She took the box out of Megan's hands. "Who taught you that you don't deserve more?" Megan didn't answer, but the question lodged in her like a splinter, one that would take months to slowly work its way to the surface. A year later, Megan was assistant manager. 2 years after that, she was handling supplier negotiations herself. Work became the first place that valued her for competence, not silent obedience. "You never say a word about your own wins," Diana noted one day, watching Megan sit back down at her desk after a successful negotiation, as if nothing had happened. "You just talked a supplier into a 15% price cut. Most managers would have told the whole office." "Not used to it," Megan said shortly. "Try it anyway. Say it out loud. I did my job well." Megan gave an awkward little laugh, but she didn't say the words out loud. Not that day. Haley was 19, sitting at the table with her college application papers spread out. "Dad, look, I want to apply for design school." "Design isn't a real profession," Richard cut her off, not looking away from the TV. "Go into accounting, at least there's money in that. Or don't bother with school at all, you'll just get married anyway." "But I don't care what you like. I'm paying for your education. I decide." Haley silently gathered her papers back into the folder. Linda, standing at the stove, pretended not to have heard. Megan was 23 when she ran into a former neighbor from the old building at a cafe. "Have you heard about Richard?" the woman asked, lowering her voice even though no one was nearby. "Drinking pretty hard, they say. And he's raised a hand to Val, apparently."
She denies it, but a black eye doesn't hide that well behind sunglasses in the middle of winter. Megan gripped her coffee cup until her knuckles went white.
"How do you know?"
People talk. Neighbors know everything. Megan didn't sleep that night. She dialed her mother's number 3 times and hung up 3 times before it could even ring. The apartment was quiet. Richard was on shift, Haley at school. Linda sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea, staring at her phone, where the contact still read Meg. Her thumb hovered over the call button. What would I even say? Sorry? For not protecting her that one time? Or for not protecting her every day since? And for throwing her out? She dialed. The screen lit green with the call button. She stared at it, listening to the elevator door bang somewhere down the hall, as if it might be Richard, home early. She pressed end before it could even connect, and deleted the number from her call history, as if that could erase the attempt itself. "I'm sorry, Meg," she whispered into the empty kitchen. No one heard her. Haley was 22. She came home with her first paycheck, excited, carrying a small cake in a box. She wanted to celebrate with the family. "I got the design job after all," she said, setting the cake on the table. "First paycheck. Can you believe it?" "Good for you," Richard grunted, not looking up from the paper. "Half of that goes here, for household expenses." "Dad, I wanted to save at least part of it." "Half," I said. He held out his hand without looking at her. Haley hesitated, then pulled out the envelope and counted out the bills. The joy on her face died out faster than it had lit up. Hey, listeners, let's take a short pause. If this story has made you stop and think, or brought back something of your own, leave a little sign, hit that like button. That's how I know these stories are really reaching people's hearts. And tell me, please, what city or country you're listening from. It's always something, seeing people from every corner of the world gather around one story. Thanks for being here with me. Let's keep going. Linda cut the cake in silence, careful not to meet anyone's eyes. 7 years later, Megan came to the door of her childhood home herself. She was 26. She'd long since stopped waiting for the phone to ring, but she'd never stopped thinking about her mother. Haley answered the door, thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there on that sharp-tongued 16-year-old. "Megan?" Haley stared at her like she'd seen a ghost. "Can I come in?" Haley didn't move. For a few seconds, she just blocked the doorway silently, and Megan had almost decided the door was about to close, just like that New Year's night. "Mom!" Haley finally called over her shoulder, without answering the question. "Megan's here." She stepped aside, reluctantly, as if yielding not to her sister, but to circumstance. Inside, the apartment looked different than Megan remembered. Poorer, more run down. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, and at the sight of her older daughter, she froze with a cup halfway to her mouth. "Meg." "Hi, Mom." A long pause. Megan braced for the same silence, the same eyes dropped to the table. But her mother suddenly set the cup down. Her hands were shaking, stood, walked over, and hugged her, tight, as if afraid her daughter might vanish again. "Forgive me," Linda whispered into her daughter's shoulder. "Forgive me. I was such a coward." Megan didn't answer right away. She stood in her mother's arms, feeling something frozen inside her for 7 years begin, slowly and painfully, to thaw. 7 years, Mom," she said finally, pulling back. 7 years I called every Sunday. Did you know that?" Linda lowered her head. "I knew." "Richard told me you just wanted to squeeze money out of us." I wanted to believe that wasn't true, but it was easier to believe him than to face it myself. "And now? What do you believe now?" Her mother looked at her with a long, exhausted look. "Now, I only believe what I see with my own eyes. And what I see is a daughter who came back, even though she had every right never to." Megan sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd once been made to apologize for money she never took.
Same table, new tablecloth. "Where's Richard?" she finally asked. Her mother pulled back, wiped her face with her palm. "Gone. 3 months ago." She gave a bitter little laugh. "Left debts in my name. Took out loans without me knowing. I didn't even find out until the collection calls started." "Did he hit you?" Megan asked quietly. Her mother didn't answer in words. She just looked away, and that was answer enough. "I'll help," Megan said. "We'll deal with the debt."
You're my family.
The weeks that followed felt like a careful truce. Megan helped with kitchen repairs, came by on weekends. One evening over dinner together, Haley suddenly laughed, genuinely, for the first time in years, at some silly joke Megan made about a customer at the furniture store. "You know," Haley said later, washing dishes with Megan side by side, "I missed you, even though I probably don't have the right to say that." "You do," Megan said quietly. A few weeks after that, Megan found Haley sitting on the stairs crying, no longer able to hold it back. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Haley wiped her face quickly with her sleeve. "Haley," Megan sat down beside her on the step. "If you're ever not okay, really not okay, come to me, always." Haley gave her a long, strange look, something warm in it, and something that looked like an old, familiar hurt. "I don't need your pity," she snapped, standing up. "You always think you're better than me."
Dad's good daughter. What, and I'm the bad one? Haley, that's not what I meant.
"Forget it," Haley cut her off, and disappeared into the building, slamming the door. Megan stayed sitting on the step alone. She recognized that tone, sharp, defensive, memorized by heart. Those were Richard's words in Haley's voice. A few months after they'd reconciled, Megan offered her sister a job. At first, Haley refused, again and again. "I don't want you hiring me out of pity." "I'm hiring you because I trust you," Megan said evenly, "and because I know you can handle it." Haley started with the basics: paperwork, vendor coordination, invoices, tracking small purchases. She settled in gradually, stopped flinching at every note of criticism, started smiling more easily. More than once, Megan caught herself thinking that, for the first time in years, being around her sister felt easy. They had lunch together. Sometimes they stayed late at the office, sorting through invoices, laughing over some ridiculous typo on a bill. It felt, to Megan, like the past was finally staying in the past. But the past hadn't gone anywhere. It had just learned to wait. Haley sat alone one evening scrolling through Megan's social media. Photos from company events, thank you notes from clients, a write-up about another award for the company. She's got everything figured out, Haley thought. The job, the house, people respect her. She looked at her laptop, the open vendor portal, the paperwork Megan had almost stopped checking personally. Megan trusted her, completely. She won't even notice one payment. The thought arrived out of nowhere and almost immediately started to sound reasonable. It's just an advance. I'll pay it back. Haley closed the program window, opened it again, created a new vendor, a shell company registered under a friend's name, and processed a small payment. A very small one.
Small enough that nobody would notice. Nobody did. A week later came another payment, then another. Sometimes fake expenses, sometimes refunds, sometimes invoices for services that had never existed. Every time, Haley told herself the same thing. Last one. But the last one kept getting pushed back. 3 months later, the head bookkeeper knocked carefully on Megan's office door. "Got a minute?" "Sure." She set several folders down in front of her. "I might be wrong, but I wanted to show you personally."
Megan went through the documents. The same vendors over and over. Strange payments, invoices for work that was never done, duplicate charges. Small amounts, but a lot of them. Way too many. Who processed these? She asked quietly. The bookkeeper hesitated. Almost all of them went through Haley. That evening, Megan drove to her mother's. Haley knew the instant she saw her face. A thick folder landed on the kitchen table. Not a single printout, but dozens of documents. Explain this to me. Haley opened the first page, closed it, then the second. She already knew denial was pointless. I was going to pay it back. Megan shook her head slowly. No. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at her sister. It's not the money. That's not what hurts the most. She rested a hand on the folder. For the first time in my life, I trusted you with part of my business. I put you right next to me, defended you in front of the staff, told everyone you could handle it. I was happy. I finally had a sister again. And this whole time, you'd walk into my office every day, smile at me, drink coffee with me, and go home at night and sign fake paperwork. Every word came out calm. That only made it worse. Haley sobbed. I needed the money. Then why didn't you come to me? Because I didn't want to feel like the poor relative getting handouts out of pity again. Pity? Megan raised her voice for the first time. I gave you a job because I believed in you. I trusted you more than anyone. Haley broke too. Because you're always the one on top. Always strong, always the good one. You left, and you got to be happy. I stayed with him every single day, every year. Do you have any idea what that was like? I can imagine. No, you can't. Because you were able to leave. I wasn't. A heavy silence fell. Megan felt something inside her break. Not trust. That was already dead. It was the last hope that they could still find their way back to each other. Linda walked into the kitchen, eyes moving helplessly between her daughters and the folder of documents. Meg, not now, Mom. Megan kept her eyes on Haley. Then she said quietly, I could go to the police. I probably should. This is a crime. Haley put her face in her hands. But I'm not going to. Megan took a breath. Not because I forgive you, and not because you've earned another chance. She let out a long breath. It's because I'm too tired of burying the people I love. She closed the folder, picked it up, and walked out slowly. The door closed quietly behind her. That silence weighed heavier than any shouting could have. Megan stopped coming by, stopped calling. On her mother's birthday, she answered with short, formal texts, no warmth in them. The door that had cracked open for a few weeks closed again, this time by her own choice. She met David 2 years later at a professional conference where Megan was presenting on expanding the furniture chain's footprint, having become the company's director of business development by then. He didn't try to impress her. He just listened and did it in a particular way, not nodding along mechanically, but sometimes circling back to some small, seemingly minor detail, as if it mattered to him alone. You've got this way of pausing before a hard question, he noted the second time they met. Like you're weighing every word. Habit, I guess, Megan said shortly. Good habit, or a defensive one? She looked at him more closely than she usually looked at people she barely knew. Both, probably. He didn't press further, but he didn't back off either. He just stayed, steady, patient, month after month, without a single attempt to push. A year into the relationship, lying next to him one night, Megan told him about Richard for the first time. Not everything, but a lot. About the kitchen, about apologizing for things she hadn't done, about the door closed on New Year's Eve. David listened without interrupting. "Strength," he said when she finished, "is also knowing how to say enough. You said it to Adam. You said it to Haley when you didn't press charges, even though you had every right to. But your mother, still no, huh?" Megan was quiet a long time in the dark.
"Not ready," she finally whispered. "Just not ready yet." He didn't push. He just took her hand and held it until she fell asleep. 6 months later, on an ordinary Sunday, David asked over breakfast, almost casually, "What if we drove out to see your mom for her birthday? Just to see how she's doing. Doesn't have to mean making up." "No," Megan said sharply, setting her cup down hard enough to splash coffee onto the saucer. "Why does it even matter to you what's going on in that family? You're not even part of it." David went quiet, looking at her with surprise. She'd never spoken to him in that tone before. "Megan." "I'm sorry," she breathed out a second later, burying her face in her hands. The anger drained as fast as it had risen, leaving nothing behind but shame. "That wasn't fair. Just don't bring it up, okay?" He nodded, said nothing, and quietly wiped up the spilled coffee with a napkin, as if that were the only thing he could do for her right then.
They got married 2 years later. Neither Linda nor Haley was at the wedding. Megan hadn't invited anyone, and no one asked why. She thought she'd closed that door for good. She was wrong. She just didn't know it yet. The summons arrived 15 years later, certified mail, an official envelope with a court seal. Megan stood in her own kitchen reading the complaint, feeling everything inside her clench up as though she were 19 again, standing in that living room under a crossfire of accusations. The plaintiffs contend that the will executed by Margaret Bennett in favor of the defendant was the product of undue influence, and that the decedent was misled. "Guilty again," she whispered. "Guilty again, just for having something they don't." David walked into the kitchen, saw her face, and knew instantly something was wrong. "What happened?" Megan handed him the envelope without a word, her hands shaking slightly. "What makes this complicated," Megan's attorney said, flipping through documents, "is that the plaintiffs really are in serious financial trouble. Richard Cole, your former stepfather, took out several loans in your mother's name before he disappeared. She's still paying them off, plus utility debts on top of that. Somebody apparently advised them to challenge the will. The odds aren't great, but there's a theoretical shot, if they can prove your grandmother lacked capacity when she signed it. And since the house was sold years ago, this isn't about getting the house back. If the court finds the will invalid, the plaintiffs can go after you for the cash value of the inheritance instead. That's why they filed." "My grandmother was sharp as a tack right up to her last day," Megan said, quiet but firm. "I believe you. But believing and proving are two different things. We need medical records from that period, witness statements, something direct, something that isn't ambiguous." Megan nodded, feeling that same old childhood sensation stir back to life. Whatever she did, she'd end up having to prove it alone. Again. Megan started digging on her own without waiting on her lawyer's formal requests. The clinic her grandmother had gone to in her final years gave her a flat, indifferent answer. Medical records over 20 years old had been destroyed once their retention period expired. "Are there any electronic copies, maybe?" Megan asked, hopeful. "Everything was still on paper back then. There's nothing left, I'm sorry." She tried tracking down the attorney who'd drawn up the will. The State Bar Association told her, curtly, that he'd died 5 years ago. His files had gone to his law partner, but the old records had been lost in an office move. Megan sat in her car in the parking lot, staring blankly through the windshield. She drove out to her grandmother's old house, which she'd sold to a middle-aged couple 10 years earlier. Hearing the story, the new owners let her up into the attic. There were still, they said, some old boxes up there. Megan climbed the creaking stairs, a lump rising in her throat. The attic smelled of dust and dry wood, exactly the way it had when she was a kid. The boxes turned out to be empty. Old newspapers, broken dishes, nothing that mattered. Megan sat down on the floor among the junk, wrapped her arms around her knees, and for the first time in weeks let herself come close to despair. Maybe the proof just doesn't exist. Maybe I'll have to fight this bare-handed, against a mother who's going to choose silence all over again. She got home late, worn down. Drifting off to sleep, she remembered the boxes she'd moved out of her grandmother's house years ago and never once opened since. She'd never had the heart.
The next morning, without telling David why, Megan hauled 3 boxes into the hallway and started going through them methodically, like she was doing hard but necessary work. Old photographs, letters from her father to her mother, written before she was born. Her grandmother's recipe notebook, pages gone yellow. At the bottom of the last box, wrapped in an old scarf, was a videotape. On the side, in her grandmother's familiar handwriting, was written, "Meg, watch when the time comes." Megan stared at the label for a long time, not quite able to make herself pick the tape up, afraid somehow that whatever was on it would disappoint her the same way everything else in this story had. David found an old VCR through a coworker. Nobody kept those around anymore, but they got lucky. Megan sat down alone in front of the screen, asking her husband to give her the room. Some things had to be gone through alone. She held the tape in her hands for several minutes, unable to make herself slide it in. Her fingers trembled slightly. What if there's nothing important on it? What if it's just some old birthday video and I built this up in my head for nothing? What if it's something I'm more afraid to hear than I am hopeful about? She pushed the tape in. The screen crackled, flickered through static, and there was her grandmother's face, older now, but with that same direct, steady gaze. "Meg, if you're ever watching this, it means I'm not around anymore. You're probably surprised about the will. That's why I wanted to leave a few words so nobody has to guess afterward why I made the choice I made. I'm in my right mind right now. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm leaving you this house deliberately. Not because I love you more than the others, and not because anyone talked me into it. It's just that over the years, I saw a lot with my own eyes. I saw who came to see me not when it was convenient, but when I actually needed someone. Who sat up with me through the hard nights, helped around the house, and never once asked for anything back. That person was you. If anyone ever tells you I was pressured or tricked, don't believe it. This was my choice. Nobody made it for me." Her grandmother paused on the recording, as if choosing her words. "And there's one more thing, Meg. Something I've wanted to tell you for a long time. I've noticed more than once how you go quiet when you're hurting. You think if you just stay silent, it'll hurt less, or you'll manage to hold the family together. I understand that. I did the same thing myself once." She smiled, a little sadly. "But listen, silence isn't always the same thing. Sometimes it helps you get through something hard, and sometimes it lets other people go on believing they were right. Don't mix the two up. Live your own life.
Don't be afraid to tell the truth when the time comes, even if it's inconvenient for somebody. And remember the most important thing. I left you this house on purpose. This was my decision, and I have never once regretted it." The recording ended on a short, warm, "Love you, sweetheart. Live for yourself." Megan sat in front of the dark screen for a long time, arms wrapped around herself, feeling for the first time in years, not pain, but a strange, heavy sense of relief. The judge listened closely to both sides' testimony. Megan's attorney introduced the tape as evidence, along with an expert's report confirming its authenticity and the date it was recorded. They played it in the courtroom. Her grandmother's voice filled the small, stuffy room, old, a little warped from the tape, but unmistakably warm. Megan wasn't watching the screen. She was watching her mother. Linda listened with a hand pressed over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. Beside her, Haley sat motionless, her knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. When the screen went dark and silence settled over the courtroom, the judge had just opened his mouth to move on, but Linda stood up before he could speak. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking, "I'm withdrawing the complaint." The judge glanced, surprised at her attorney, but Linda had already turned to Megan. "Forgive me," she said, and for the first time in 38 years, there was no excuse in the words, no attempt to explain it away, just the plain truth. "I knew you never cheated your grandmother. I knew it that night, the night we threw you out, and I've known it every year since. I was just so afraid of him that I learned to be afraid of the truth, too. Every time I should have said even one word in your defense, I chose silence instead. Because silence was easier than losing the one man who I thought was keeping this family afloat." She choked back a sob.
I didn't betray you once. I betrayed you for years, a little at a time, every single time I stayed quiet instead of standing between you and him.
Megan listened without moving, her nails digging into her own palm. Something huge was rising in her, years in the making. Not relief, not forgiveness, but the sheer need to finally speak. "Me too," Haley's voice came. She was standing, gripping the back of a chair as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "Except my guilt is different." She looked at Megan. For the first time, without defiance, without anger. "Remember the money that I stole from you?" Megan nodded without a word. "I told you back then I needed the money. That wasn't true." She dropped her eyes. "I couldn't stand watching you get out, while I couldn't." The courtroom went silent. "After you left, things at home only got worse. Richard started drinking, yelling, sometimes hitting. Mom, me.
Every day he said the same thing, that I was worthless, weak, that nobody would want me without him." She drew in a shaky breath.
"And you know what's the worst part?" She lifted her eyes. "A few years in, I started thinking the exact same way. Not about myself, about other people."
When I stole from you, I told myself I was just setting things right.
She gave a bitter little laugh. "And then I realized I wasn't setting anything right. I was just turning into him. Very slowly. So slowly I didn't even notice the moment I stopped being myself."
Megan looked at her sister, broken, honest for the first time in years,
and felt two entirely different, equally true feelings collide inside her. She understood Haley, and it still hurt. "All rise," the clerk said. But by then it was clear to everyone in the room there was nothing left to decide. The judge dismissed the case on the plaintiff's withdrawal. After the hearing, in the empty courthouse hallway, Megan caught her mother's hand.
Mom,
She said, and for the first time in 38 years her voice didn't shake.
I'm not going to stay silent anymore. Not with you, not with Haley, not with anyone. I stayed quiet for too long. When I was accused, when I was made to apologize, when I was thrown out, when the door was shut in my face. I thought silence was the price I paid for the right to stay close to you. But it isn't. Silence doesn't save a family. It destroys it, slowly, quietly, over years. She took a breath. I don't want to be silent anymore, even when the truth is inconvenient. Linda nodded, tears running down her face. I know, Meg. I know. For the next few weeks, Megan didn't call. Not because she'd changed her mind, because she didn't know how to start a conversation that wouldn't take 5 minutes, but, in truth, the rest of both their lives.
More than once she dialed her mother's number, let it ring 3 times, and hung up, exactly the way Linda used to do to her. David found her once, standing frozen in the middle of the kitchen, phone in hand. You don't have to rush this, he said quietly. You're allowed to take as much time as you need.
What if I'm never ready?
Then that's how it'll be, and that's okay too. She looked at him for a long moment, and, for what felt like the first time in years, let herself not have a ready answer. A month after the trial, Megan finally called her mother and suggested they meet at a cafe, neutral ground.
I want us to try again, she said, looking her mother in the eye. But not the way it was before. Not by pretending none of it happened. The past happened. I'm not going to act like I've forgotten.
I understand, Linda said quietly.
If we're going to see each other, it's on my terms. I'm not staying quiet anymore when something bothers me.
And I don't expect you to be a perfect mother, just an honest one. Linda nodded, meeting her eyes without looking away for the first time in years.
Deal.
Haley wasn't part of that conversation. Megan saw her 2 weeks later, a brief, careful meeting at the same cafe.
I don't expect you to forgive me, Haley said, turning a spoon over in her hands. For the money, for becoming him, even a little, even for a while. I'm not forgiving you, not yet, Megan said honestly. But I want to understand you. That's not the same as forgiving. But it's a step. You know what the scariest part is? Haley said quietly. I still catch myself talking in his words. I'll look at someone and suddenly hear his tone coming out of my own mouth. I don't know how many years it's going to take before I stop being his echo. Maybe the center will help, Megan said. Not just other people. You too. What center? The one I'm about to open in Grandma's house.
Forgiveness turned out not to be a single moment, but a long, uneven process. One that was only just beginning. But beginning for real. 6 months later, Megan stood in the yard of her grandmother's house, the one with the apple trees, the one she'd once sold and then bought back after finding out the new owners wanted to flip it. Over the porch hung a fresh sign, Margaret's House, a support center for women who have survived domestic abuse. Inside, in what used to be the living room, there were now soft armchairs and a bookshelf. Haley, thinner now but clear-eyed, was setting out brochures. She'd become the center's coordinator, doing something for the first time in her life, not because someone told her to, but because she'd chosen it herself. Megan, she called. There's a woman here, first time, she's really scared.
Will you talk to her? Megan nodded and walked toward the door.
On the porch, in the old wicker chair, Linda sat holding a small grandson, Megan and David's son, smiling easily for the first time in years, no trace of fear left in her eyes. Megan paused in the doorway, looking at the scene, not perfect, not fully healed, but real. The weight she'd carried her whole life hadn't disappeared entirely. But now, at last, she let herself set it down. Here, at least, among people who were also learning to speak again after years of silence. The woman sat on the edge of the chair, clutching her purse like it was the last solid thing in the world. 30, maybe, no older, frightened eyes, the flinch of someone used to jumping at loud sounds. "Hi," she said quietly. "I don't really know where to start. I probably shouldn't have come. You've got enough going on without me." Megan sat down across from her, not too close, giving her room. "You know what someone told me once?" she said gently.
There's a silence that protects you until you're ready to talk. And there's a silence that slowly eats you alive. You don't have to tell me everything at once. We're not in any hurry. The woman looked up at her for the first time in the conversation, and something like relief flickered across her face.
"Thank you,"
she whispered.
Megan smiled, tired but real, and said the words that, for so many people who walked through that door, marked the beginning of a long road back to themselves. "Hi, I'm Megan. I'm listening. Tell me whenever you're ready." Hey everyone, that brings us to the end of today's story. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people closest to us. And the most frightening part of stories like this isn't the shouting. It's the years of silence, when everyone's too afraid to make the first move. I want to leave you with a question. Do you think we always owe our family forgiveness?
Or are there some things after which keeping your distance is the right call, even when it's family? I'd love to hear what you think, and if you're willing, share your own story. Someone out there going through something similar might need to hear it. If this story found its way into your heart, show it some love with a like. It genuinely helps the channel. And of course, subscribe. There are a lot more real-life stories ahead, and you might just recognize a piece of yourself in one of them. Thank you for spending this time with me today. This has been narrated by Michael. Take care of yourselves, take care of the people you love, and may your life always have room for people you never have to stay silent around.